If you've ever driven through the centre of the small Scottish town of Cumbernauld, you've probably noticed something a little bit unusual. Squatting over the road like a giant alien spaceship is a 6-storey tall brutalist megastructure that looks as though it's made of several normal buildings that have been bent out of shape and glued together at odd angles. This is the Centre Cumbernauld, and if you ever get the chance to visit, absolutely do so. There's no place quite like it in the whole of the UK. It's a shopping mall basically, but one of the strangest shopping malls you'll ever visit. It's confusing, complicated, and eerily empty. The place feels abandoned and simultaneously feels like it's marooned somewhere in the late 1970s. You can walk around the building for hours and still find new nooks and crannies. The Cumbernauld Centre is weird, and it's got an extremely weird history too. Cumbernauld started life as a fairly modest little village. The grandest structure to be found for miles around was Cumbernauld House, a small stately home where Scottish royals would occasionally come to plant yew trees and shoot pheasants. It was pretty sleepy, all things considered, but that changed dramatically in 1955 when it was chosen as the site for a new town. New towns were settlements built more or less from scratch on the outskirts of existing cities to provide clean housing and more space for city dwellers who wanted to escape urban overcrowding. In this case, Cumbernauld would be situated on the edge of Glasgow, which was, to say the least, a bit full. People were cramming into tenement buildings with no gardens, no open spaces, and facilities that were 100 years old and totally smelled like it. Cumbernauld would be different. It would be a fresh start. It would be bold and daring and experimental. It would be, well, kind of ugly. But the kind of ugly that was very fashionable and cutting edge in the 1950s. And to be fair, the new town of Cumbernauld had a lot of things that just made sense. The houses looked retro now, but were a big step up from the crowded tenements of Glasgow. And some proper thought had been put into the layout of the place. Each neighbourhood had its own community centre and corner shop, and a certain number of houses were specially designed for the elderly. The whole thing was linked together by a winding network of paths which allowed you, no matter where you lived in Cumbernauld, to take a leisurely stroll to the centre in 20 minutes, and to do so without ever crossing a road. Thanks to a network of bridges and underpasses, cars would never encounter pedestrians, and pedestrians would never encounter cars. Good design, you might say. But what about the centre itself? Instead of the usual British high street, Cumbernauld would have something else, something new. Cumbernauld would have the centre, a single vast structure that would form the heart of Cumbernauld. It would have everything: car parking, shops, offices, a creche, a waffle stand, a hotel, a gym, leisure and exercise facilities, community spaces, and premium penthouse accommodation. Basically, take everything you could possibly think of and stick it under one massive roof right in the middle of town. If you think that's an exciting concept, you're not alone. In the early years, Cumbernauld was considered a shining beacon of town planning. In fact, it was so lauded that it featured in several documentaries and even had its own James Bond-style knockabout spy comedy made to promote it. For the first few years, Cumbernauld rode this wave of optimism. In the 1950s, demand for housing in the new town was so high that you had to go through a stringent vetting process before moving there. Jobs were plentiful, and there was lots to do, with hundreds of clubs and societies forming among the town's young, dynamic population. Tourists flocked to the centre, and official tours were organised to allow visitors a glimpse of the city of the future. The whole place glowed with optimism. This optimism didn't last. It couldn't. Years passed, and cracks began to show. Literally in some cases. In the 1960s, structural problems forced tenants to vacate the iconic penthouse apartments. The centre sprang a bunch of leaks. The Golden Eagle Hotel, which had once provided accommodation for the town's many excited visitors, was demolished after a careless driver smashed it with their car in the 1970s. The centre, which had once looked like a bold and brilliant innovation, slowly started becoming a liability. The corporation which had initially been set up to manage the centre shut down, and the complex was left to the town council, who promptly sold it off to a private shopping centre management consortium. Under this new management, more parts of the original development were demolished and replaced with a brand new shopping mall, the Antonine Centre, which opened in 2007. The Cumbernauld Centre was now visibly struggling. What had seemed state-of-the-art in the 1950s looked dated by the 1970s, and then positively ancient by the 1990s. Renovations were delayed over and over again, because renovating something this big that's owned by a dozen different corporations is basically impossible. Fewer and fewer of the available retail units were occupied. As one tenant after another left, there were less and less reasons for people to visit the centre, leading to a decline in foot traffic. This, in turn, saw off even more retailers. Gradually, over the course of many years, the centre ceased to be cutting edge and became instead a dilapidated and eerily empty carbuncle. The underpasses that were supposed to keep pedestrians safe were now unnervingly dark and remote at night. The abandoned penthouses became grubby and derelict. The roof leaked, retail units sat empty. Architects that had once showered Cumbernauld with awards for its brilliant and futuristic design did a smart about turn and started to plaster it with awards for its ugliness instead. Gradually, this ugliness came to define Cumbernauld, which, let's be clear, is rather unfair, all things considered. The rest of the town is still perfectly fine, legitimately quite lovely in fact. But in the case of Cumbernauld, it was impossible to look past the centre, the carbuncle, the huge, unavoidable mistake that loomed large in the middle of the town. For many years, the centre remained the subject of much debate. It was inarguably a unique piece of architecture, with many people campaigning tirelessly for its preservation as a historic structure. But it was also impractical, outdated, and hated by the majority of residents. Residents who longed to have a normal, accessible high street with a Macca's and a Boots and a big discount shoe place like every other town in Scotland. What exactly will happen to the Cumbernauld Centre isn't entirely certain, but it does seem that its days are numbered. In 2022, North Lanarkshire Council succeeded in purchasing it back from its private owners and announced that they plan to demolish the whole thing and replace it with a new, much smaller, much more human-friendly high street. When that will happen, and whether any parts of the unique structure will be preserved, is as yet unknown. For now, the centre remains in place, like a downed spaceship, underused, eerie, almost abandoned, a bizarre and haunting monument to a future that never came.